Pound of Flesh by Shembre. Chapter 18. Simba. Walking in front of Nala, Simba turned around and nuzzled her. Tears stood in her eyes. Exhaustion lined her face. They sat down at the base of Pride Rock, leaning against each other. It was the little precious moments with Nala that helped to center Simba. You shouldn't have needed to calm down the lionesses, Nala. It shouldn't have gotten to this point. I could have stopped the ambush. Nala buried her face in his red mane. I wish I had more of a killer streak. Wouldn't it make the situation less complicated? Nala shook her head. Don't wish that, Simba. I know you really don't. It's not your nature. You can't stand what your uncle was and what he did. Simba heaved a breath. It's just sometimes I feel like it doesn't make you any less of a king if your first reaction isn't one of violence. But my father, you are not Mufasa. Nala cut him off kindly. Simba deflated. His eyelids grew heavy and his joints ached like never before. His head was stuck somewhere between a dense fog and a horde of loudly chattering birds. When had he last slept? When had he slept with any rest? Dealing with the outsiders has made me feel like a coward. I just remember how brave my father was. He never hesitated. Oh, but you are brave too. You want so much to walk the path expected of you, Simba. But what matters more? How you think the path should be walked, or that you walk it at all? Simba sighed. Raising her head away from his mane, Nala gave him a half smile. What you need is time, and I know that's what I can't give you. She leaned in and rubbed her nose against his, but stopped when the roars of two more lions swept across the land. Simba narrowed his eyes and strained his perked up ears. Is that a declaration of war? It almost sounded like the lions were fighting each other, but he wasn't sure. A chill ran up Simba's spine, and a giddy sense of urgency spread all throughout his body. We should alert the pride. This might finally be it. Nala nodded. She masked the exhaustion on her face with her usual calm serenity, but Simba still detected a hint of distress in her eyes. He licked Nala's cheek. Let's get to it. Zira staggered with a loud gasp. Vitani lunged for her throat. Even disorientated by Vitani's blow to her head, Zira swung out at Vitani, who ducked and sprang away to escape her mother's claws. Zira stepped back too. Mother and daughter faced each other. Zira took a step to the left. Vitani, baring her teeth, took a mirroring step to the right. After several cycling steps, they stopped moving and glared at each other. Reality sank in and took root. How has it come to this point? Am I really prepared to fight her? Are you mad, Vitani? Zira's ragged fur struck from a protruding spine. Am I mad? Maybe a little. Vitani flared her nostrils. Mother, you've brought the pride to the brink. You can't take us further. I'll lead from now on. You kill Simba only to murder me too. On the dawn of a new era, I did not kill him, Vitani snapped. I'm going to make a deal with him for peace. Treacherous fool! How dare you betray me? Zira's lip twitched. Her whole body trembled. How dare you betray Scar? Vitani lowered her head. I've betrayed nobody of any consequence. I can't stomach more of your hatred. It cost Nuka his life. Nuka's life was worth so little in the entirety of the plan. Vitani's throat tightened and her guts clenched. Words like that make me want to end your life that much faster, Mother. Traitor! If one look could stop a heart cold,
You're wrong if you think you can kill me.
Vitani moved with the older lioness as they again circled each other. Zira sprang with a roar. Vitani dodged right, but took a glancing scratch to her chest. Vitani twisted around and bit down on Zira's ear and shook her head violently. Zira gave a fitful roar, bucking and jerking her head in an attempt to dislodge her attacker. Vitani was determined to keep hold, but her fangs tore through the flesh of her mother's ear. She stumbled back and rolled aside an instant before Zira could connect a blow to her head. Blood from Vitani's chest scratches stained the grass. On her paws again, Vitani launched herself at Zira, ramming her head into the lioness's bony chest. Winded, Zira staggered and gagged. She struggled to regain her breath, but she still managed to dodge Vitani's lethal throat bite over and over again. Bawling and snorting like an enraged buffalo, the lionesses aimed and successfully smashed over a dozen blows down on the other's head and face. Part of Zira's nose had been flayed open. Blood was running into Vitani's right eye, obscuring her sight. Conserving her strength and ending the fight swiftly was now out of the question. Zira was fighting too hard, quick and brutal. Her mother's fuse was much shorter than her own. Panting hard, Vitani knew she needed to exploit that. The words gathered on her blood-coated tongue. "You've let us rot." Vitani dodged a paw aimed at her head. "You lied about Shembre. Kovu's best chance was for you to give him up." Zira growled and the bridge of her nose wrinkled as she sprang at Vitani, who leaped at the side and spun to bite Zira in the hip before leaping away. Snarling, Zira bristled. She leapt and swatted Vitani's side with her claws. Vitani hissed. "Scar never loved you," Vitani taunted. She concentrated on defending herself as she relentlessly tried to catch Zira off guard, an impossible task. How could she defeat Zira? Her mind was giving over to her wounds. She was getting sloppier and slower. Zira laughed in gasps. A thick froth clung to her black gums. "I guess one part of being insane means your will to live is almost unbreakable." Finally, Vitani leapt on Zira. They rolled and tumbled into a bush. A startled bird cried and threw itself into the air. Thorns stabbed at the panting lionesses as they tore at each other. Sprawled on her back, dazed by the blows to her head, and bewildered by leaves and branches, Vitani tried to slide out from under Zira. Instead, she was forced to hold Zira back with her legs. Her mother's dirt-encrusted wounds dripped blood on Vitani. Zira launched with a snarl, but a shifting branch blocked her. Vitani tucked her chin to protect her neck. She dug her hind claws into Zira's stomach. Branches and leaves rattled Vitani's mind. "Great kings, curse me the rest of my life, but give me the stamina to defeat my mother." "Quit!" Zira clawed at Vitani. "Quit!" Zira's hot, enraged breath fell on Vitani's bleeding face. "Traitor!" Vitani swatted back and roared. She flexed her toe claws, really-digging them into Zira, using all her remaining strength. Zira gasped. Her weight faltered. Still gasping, Zira tumbled from the bush. Vitani disentangled herself. She'd seen blood countless times, but this time it seemed unreal. Blood pooled dark red beside the alpha lioness's shredded belly. Her breathing was jagged, and she gasped at her open wounds. Vitani watched, conscious of the fact that she'd taken milk from that belly. Out of breath and shaky-limbed, Vitani stood over her mother and stared calmly, flicking the end of her tail.
"Shembre will never accept you,"
Zira snarled, wheezing. She raised a paw and batted at Vitani, almost in slow motion, before resting her head on the ground.
"Disgraceful."
"Whatever happens now, we have the choice to go anywhere or do whatever we want." Vitani's hind legs gave out from under her with such violence she nearly toppled over. She sat down before the trembling in her forelegs became too much as well. She laid down. Each breath of air she sucked in felt entirely freeing. Life seeped from Zira as death sought her out, like a hawk swooping down on a rodent. Vitani closed her eyes. Her wounds burned. She never forget all the pain that the lioness had inflicted upon her body, mind, and heart. As she listened to her mother's rasping breath, it was a task for Vitani to remember any ounce of sweetness that they'd shared. Although most of their experiences had been scarifying, and although only death wanted Zira now, Zira was still her mother. She settled comfortably on the memory of Zira grooming her downy baby fur, calmed and held in the warmth of someone's paws. Her mother cooed into her ear with a voice as pleasing as a cool breeze, or the scent of a nice flower.
Yes, my beautiful, strong daughter. One day, you will do great things. You'll be the kind of lioness all prides need most.
Perking her ragged ears and opening her eyes, Vitani realized that Zira was no longer breathing. Kovu and the Pride again waited for Vitani and the outsiders to make a move. Before dark, Simba and Nala had heard roars, but then silence. More than once did Kovu hear someone mutter a prayer to the great kings, while the others kept watch. Kovu slept and woke up frequently throughout the night, but Kiara calmed him back into a restless, painful sleep. The more he'd woken up and was comforted, however, the more he'd looked for Kiara and less for any attack by the outsiders. When he woke up just after dawn, Kiara nudged him and whispered into his ear, "Kovu, Rafiki's here." Blinking his eyes, he tried to sit up, but flopped back down. "He must be here to check my wounds." "He's saying something about Vitani." Kovu's eyes widened. What? Had he misheard her? He looked at her face. Kiara's attention was on Rafiki. The sun outlined the shaman and Simba as they talked at the den entrance. "She said really bad. And your mother's gone." "Vitani killed her." Rafiki heard them fighting and went to see what was happening. "Zira's dead. Really dead. And Vitani. Oh. Now I really wonder what she's up to." The lionesses immediately started to talk amongst themselves. Already knowing the kind of sentiment they were spewing, Kovu turned them out. He didn't know how he should feel. Relieved? Mournful? Disappointed? Angry? Grateful? He certainly didn't feel the same sickening, thick and heavy grief he felt for Sarabi, for the loss of Zira, and instead he almost felt lighter for it. She'd given him away. She tested Simba's trust in him. The end of Zira's tale was only tragic for her. No one else. He did not feel guilty that he'd hated his birth mother. His sister had been driven to kill her. Though, despite all Vitani had done, her loyalty to Zira obviously had not been solid through the bones. Kovu. Why had Vitani done this? Why now? He knew he should give up trying to understand everything in such a borderline obsessive manner, but he didn't believe he could stop. Kovu? He turned and looked at Kiara. Did I miss something? He blinked and shook his head to clear it. Kiara? Kiara lowered her ears and she pursed her mouth. He shook his head and raised an eyebrow. What is it? Well, when you were lost there for a moment, she said in an almost wispy voice, you just looked so angry. Choked by his embarrassment, Kovu could only look away. His face flushed. You were thinking about your family, weren't you? Like always, she placed her paw on his. He resisted the urge to pull away. He didn't want to shut her out, but far more than that. He wanted to spare her the full cruelty of his inner world. Ow! He winced and realized that Kiara had pricked him with her nails. He frowned. This isn't the time to shut down, she whispered. We need you. You've tried to help all this time. Kovu stared sullenly at Kiara. He realized then how exhausted he was. The outsiders need you because nobody else really knows them like you. Kovu, your sister. Kovu looked up at Simba and Rafiki. We've heard about Vitani and Zira, Kiara told them. Ah, Simba nodded. He looked uncertain for a moment, as if he was wondering what he should or even could say. I'm going to see Vitani now, Simba said, as he eyed Kovu's wounded body. A hint of pain entered into his father's eye. I will take care of this. Kovu, don't you worry. I'll figure out the next step. Of all the times he'd heard Simba say this before, Kovu did believe him. Before he could ask Simba what his plans were, the king abruptly turned around and walked to the den entrance. Nala was waiting for him. Together they disappeared. Slowly, carefully, Rafiki started to massage and skillfully prod and test Kovu's wounds. Kovu stared into space. Everything was so surreal. One walk with Sarabi in this world had shifted and morphed. He imagined his sister, fresh from the murder of their mother, with her gory wounds and bloody face, her determined blue eyes and calculating mind lying somewhere with the very same goop on his body, caking her tawny fur. Lying there, waiting for something else to happen because she'd already done what had been the last resort. Murdering the leader of the outsiders. Kovu wanted to laugh. He didn't know what else to do, so he bit down on his tongue so he wouldn't look any crazier than everybody else already suspected him to be. The thoughts in his head were as loud as a stampede. He doesn't this often? Since he came home after visiting Zira. How has he slept? Off and on. Tishk, tishk, tishk. Rafiki grabbed Kovu's chin. Startled, Kovu gave a snarl and narrowed his eyes. The shaman stared right back, looking deep into the young lion. You have a head on your shoulders that just won't stop. If you were me, you'd know why. You need more rest. I need to know what my sister is up to. Oh, yes, in time. What has she said? What about the other outsiders? My greatest concern was treating her wounds. As for you, I have something to make you sleep. Rafiki let go of Kovu's face. There was a little pouch on his staff, and the dry girds clanked as the shaman untied it. The packet of crushed dried herbs lay open on Rafiki's palm. Rafiki grinned. Kovu tensed up and growled. No, I'm not sleeping until Simba and Nala return. There was a little water left in half the gourd that Rafiki had brought earlier for Kovu. When Rafiki tipped his palm and the dry herbs sopped up the water, Kovu's thirst returned. The herbs clumped up. He shook his head. Now, how fair is that? Rafiki smirked and lifted the bowl to Kovu's chin. Kovu curled his lip, shaking his head again. With 2 fingers, Rafiki scooped up some of the herbs. The little mound of dull green gunk balanced on the ends of his digits. He held it under Kovu's nose. Kovu, Rafiki is trying to help you. Kiara looked him in the eye, and she had his full attention. You don't have to be so tough all the time. Give in now so you can regain your strength later. She'd always had something to say to him, hadn't she? Whether he told her to stop bothering him, whether he'd given her a secret to keep, or whether he needed her even when he wanted to suffer alone. She'd let him know what was on her mind. She'd been an ear to listen when he thought nobody was paying attention, but she'd never patted him on the back before he'd met his lowest low. He'd rescued her from death by fire, but she was trying to tug him away from something much, much worse. At that moment, Kiara gave him a small, beautiful smile, and her eyes never left his. Kiara, Rafiki shoved the herbs into Kovu's mouth. He went to spit out the bitter herbs, but Rafiki squeezed his paws around his snout, clamping his jaws shut. Swallow, don't spit it out. The herbs slid down Kovu's throat, and only after another moment did Rafiki let go of Kovu. The shaman picked up the little gourd and left to refill it with water. What were you about to say, Kovu? Huh? What had been on the tip of his tongue? The words took the stumbling steps from his mouth. He couldn't look at Kiara. Well, I just wanted to... Yes? She tilted her head to the side. I wanted to say that Had he been about to say something he'd never told anybody else? No, of course not. He thought, or maybe... But what if she didn't feel the same way about him? His heart flew into a panic. It's okay. You can tell me later if you want. Moving cautiously, Kiara lay down beside him. I told you, you need rest. His stomach gurgled a bit. The herbs would probably take effect sooner rather than later in this otherwise empty belly. He laid down on his side, and Kiara faced him. He raised the paw and hesitantly rested it on her foreleg. She smiled, looking sleepy herself. He smiled back as a pleasant warmth filled his chest. Close your eyes and go to sleep, Kovu. He closed them as he thought, I love you, Kiara. End of chapter 18. To be concluded in chapter 19.